I heard somebody say, ah. Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Sylvia, for that song. Our hearts are lifted right now, right? We are at ease with uncertainty. Maybe there's something to spiritual practice that makes a difference. We're on to something. So I'm going to take you in a little different direction because I want to point out that there are some things that we can do to cultivate this being at ease with uncertainty. It's fairly easy to do that here, right? But when we leave the building, get back in the car and start doing whatever we do, that's where the challenge comes in, right? So I want to talk about some of my experiences. So I was 27 years living in Central Florida. If you've lived in Florida for any amount of time, you become very familiar with hurricanes. So you have off of the coast of Africa, like a Roman candle, shooting these energy balls into the Atlantic Ocean that travel all the way across the Atlantic Ocean and have that whole from the East Coast all the way into South America as their target. And as they approach, you have a wave of uncertainty building within you, wondering whether it's going to impact your life or not. Now, being in Central Florida, we didn't have the same level of concern about taking action as people on the coast. Because on the coast, if you had a hurricane, you had to get out of Dodge. And some people stayed, but there's crazy people everywhere. So over the course of those 27 years in Central Florida, we had several hurricanes, and a lot of the tropical storms even did more damage than some of the hurricanes. But we had 3 or 4 that were really significant, and one in particular ripped right down the center of Florida with over 100-mile-an-hour winds. And if you have never been through anything like that, don't move to Florida because you'll get it. But what happened is that after the storm, we had 9 days without electricity. After the storm, the debris was piled up in the streets to a level of like 8 feet, all throughout our neighborhood, all throughout Central Florida. So going to the airport, there was an executive airport on the way to the international airport. They had set aside an area that was over 1,500 feet square. And the debris, just from trees, exceeded 12 feet high. And this went on for quite a while. When you get up in an airplane, what you saw, you looked down, and there was blue tarps it was incredible to see more than a checkerboard of blue tarps all over the place. So those were the houses that had been damaged. So we were without electricity for 9 days. And the headline in the Orlando Sentinel, which was the local newspaper, they had to pick the biggest font they could find, and the font said, "Powerless." So the Sunday that I was able to come in and do a talk, my talk was no longer powerless, because that is what happens, is we feel because of this uncertainty that was generated and then all of this happened, we felt powerless. But the reality was we had only lost electricity. We had only lost transportation. We had only lost all of these things, but we retained our power. It was an important distinction. And my commitment had always been to root out the ways in myself that I had deceived myself about being powerless. And my journey as a minister has always been to stand up and help people understand that they are never powerless, that there are always choices that they can be, and that they have to step into the fullness of who they have come here to be. But you can't do it. The first spiritual practice of becoming at ease with uncertainty is reclaiming your power and standing up to that. So now we're in this place of heightened uncertainty, and it's a debilitating energy. There's no doubt about it. Between the pandemic, and things that are happening now with inflation, people have lost 12, 15% of their portfolios, financial portfolios, and then we see the images of tanks and troops in the Ukraine. And it's heartbreaking. There's no doubt about it. And so how do we deal with that in terms of uncertainty? And the answer is finding a spiritual practice that reminds us that we're not powerless. The world is going to do what the world is going to do. It always has. It always will. In the cycle of human consciousness, we see those cycles of, uncertainty and then something happening and then uncertainty and something better happening. And the question is, how do we find solace in that? So I want to look at it in terms of maybe history, this energy of uncertainty. And if we go back to primitive humans, what they were dealing with, they were afraid that they didn't know where the saber-toothed tiger was, or they didn't know what the rival clan was doing. They didn't know whether they would survive the storms and the harshness of nature. So there was a high level of uncertainty. And what came out of that was some wise people coming forward to offer solace and comfort, and started to develop the idea of gods and goddesses, something that could, through worship and ritual, mitigate the sense of uncertainty and powerlessness. So in this sense that I'm talking about, uncertainty has a certain quality of being a generative energy, that things rise up out of uncertainty that had never existed before. Gods and goddesses, right? Ritual in some form. When we look at this evolution, what rose up out of this was some critical thinking and possibility thinking. And people looked at the concept of gods and goddesses, and the critical thinking started to fragment all that. And what rose up out of that, among other things, was Christianity, right? And Christianity was a very powerful force, and it gave people some solace. And then what happened is you had the Dark Ages. And after the Dark Ages, you had the Renaissance just exploding. And so you can see this cycle of uncertainty generating new ideas, new possibilities, a new energy that relates to the creative process. So Christianity, religion, continues to provide solace for a lot of people. And that's a good thing, because the level of uncertainty just can be crushing. It's debilitating. What happens, though, with science and critical thinking, it begins to chip away at the dogma and the superstition that exists with many religions. And less people find solace in being able to do that, except when uncertainty swells and creates such debilitating energy that they flock back to religion. They find religion all of a sudden. It's like the atheist in the foxhole. Please, God, if you get me out of this, I promise to go to church every Sunday, or to support this church or that church or the other. The problem with that is that it requires imposing a repression of self-awareness. A repression of self-awareness. And it requires a conformity to a certain way to think. For example, we're asked to let a priest be the mediator between God and ourselves. We can go to confession, tell them what we did wrong, and they are the sin eaters, right? Right? They take our sins, say 3 Our Fathers and 3 Hail Marys, and then I can go off and still act out all the stuff that I need to act out, It still provides solace for people that are okay with that, and that's a good thing. because we need people to be comfortable in the face of uncertainty. In the 19th century, Walt Whitman, who's one of the transcendentalists, said this: "The day the priest is done, they've done their work. Every person shall be their own priest." So this is a shift from that generative energy, a shift in consciousness, that suddenly people are empowered, that they can do this on their own. This is a huge difference. If we look at that, the Transcendentalist movement arose out of the repressive Puritan and Calvinistic religion that was in the early 19th century. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "I can deliver a sermon in one of my churches," Unitarian minister is what he was. "I can deliver a sermon and be shunned after that sermon. But I can go to Harvard and I am applauded." Isn't that interesting? That began to show the shift in consciousness towards self-empowerment, because that's what the transcendental movement was about. So if we want to be at ease with uncertainty, we have to recognize that repressing our self-awareness doesn't work. It won't cut it if we really want to truly step into the biggest idea of the gifts that we have and who we've come here to be and deliver it. So it's a very different way of looking at things. All of the avatars, whether from the Old Testament or the New Testament, whether it's Jesus, Buddha, whoever your favorite avatar is, have served in some way as a consciousness alarm clock, waking us up to our spiritual magnificence. Don't we say that all the time? We're waking up to our spiritual magnificence. And we're waking up to this sense of personal empowerment. And that's a great thing. The early 20th century was characterized by a spiritual renaissance with the emergence of psychology, first of all, and New Thought. They kind of went together at the same time because we were trying to understand this sense of personal empowerment. What does it mean? How does it impact me? What can I do? But it was about expanding possibility thinking. And after World War II, with the affluence that was beginning to be established throughout the world, right, we noticed something called the prosperity gospel, right? So people started teaching from the pulpit about how we can all be prosperous and what that involved. And that created, or came out of that, Dale Carnegie, Norman Vincent Peale, even Tony Roberts came out of that same movement of personal empowerment. However, Ernest Holmes did warn us that the science of mind is not a get-rich-quick scheme, right? We had to develop a deep spiritual practice to really maintain this ability to be at ease with anything that was going on. It's interesting, when you're preparing a talk, and I was at this coffee bean restaurant or cafe over here, and I was working on my talk, and I looked up across the street, and the marquee on the Bay Theater on Main Street said this: "The road to success is dotted with many tempting parking places." Doesn't that describe our spiritual journey? This is too hard, I'm going to just park for a while. And that's part of the challenge, because the consumer culture demands a spiritual practice that is quick, convenient, and easy. Quick, convenient, and easy. All of the advertisements that we see talk about something being quick, convenient, and easy, something that we can get our hands on, get our instant gratification, and move on to the next thing. Quick, convenient, and easy doesn't work with developing a habitual spiritual practice. It just doesn't. And so we've got to recognize that and see where we are on that path. So in in spiritual dynamics, or spiral dynamics, which is a model for the evolution of consciousness, where we are right now is characterized by intolerance of intolerance. You see, what's happened is with all this personal empowerment, I can say whatever I want to say without any consequence. And so what we saw when Donald Trump was being impeached, everybody was suddenly a constitutional expert. And then the pandemic came and we were all experts in vaccination and viruses. And now with what's happening in Ukraine, everybody's a foreign policy expert and knows exactly what to do. And the danger with that is they can say whatever they want to say with no consequence, because I have a right, because I'm empowered, personally empowered, to say whatever I want, and we're allowed to do that. It's very interesting. So this intolerance of intolerance is what we've seen is it's like shouting into a mirror and saying, everything would be fine if you just listened to what I have to say. Right? So what do we do? I mean, what's the next step? If we're stuck at this place, what's the next step? Beyond intolerance of intolerance. Well, in the spiral dynamics model, the next step is characterized as being at ease with uncertainty. I didn't make it up, that's what the model says. But that really inspires me. What is it that we have to do to reach that place of being at ease with uncertainty? What does it take? So let me ask you, if you recapture this feeling that you just had of being at ease with uncertainty, take a big deep breath and close your eyes. It feels good, doesn't it? What if you could imagine the feeling of being stress-free all the time? No matter what's going on in your life, you could come back to this place with confidence and knowing this is who I am. This is really what's going on. Now the challenge, of course, as we said, is walking out the door and maintaining that concept. And I'm sure some of us, through either meditation or spiritual mind treatment or whatever modality you're using, have reached that place of being at ease with uncertainty, being comfortable in your skin, trusting and knowing that all is well in the world, and then you get a call from your mother. Or your friend, or whoever it is, and right away you're feeling anxious and all of that. And that's okay. But we've got to have a way through that. You see, the barrier between intolerance of intolerance and being at ease with uncertainty, there's a barrier of love, of fear, doubt, worry, anxiety, all of those things that challenge us every day. And so somehow we've got to break through that barrier and shatter those ideas. And that isn't easy. It requires courage to commit to a spiritual practice that will help you move through those times of stress. We've got to get into a deeper connection with Source. We hear that all the time, right? We've got to get into a deeper connection with Source. Well, that next step, to be at ease with uncertainty, yes, we've got to make a connection to Source, but we have to understand that requires us to be in connection with each other more than we've ever imagined before. We've got to be in deep connection to each other. And I love Sylvia's song because that's really the key to it. I talked 2 weeks ago. In the Bible, it says, Love the Lord your God with your whole heart, mind, soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. Well, in this philosophy, we believe that the Lord God is where? So we have to develop a spiritual practice where we can love ourselves radically before we can try and love the other. So that's the starting place. But significantly, the next line in Matthew says, the entirety of the law depends on those two commandments. The law being fully expressing spiritual intention for evolution of consciousness. That's the step, is that all this other stuff doesn't matter if we can't first love ourselves and love the other as we love ourselves. The progress of evolution depends on that. It's interesting, isn't it? And so when there's uncertainty, we need to step into that place. So the question might be, how do we do that? Well, this community is already doing an extraordinary job of creating an environment of safety, of trust, of compassion, of gratitude, and extraordinary respect. We talked about extraordinary respect with a rabbi's gift, where you are the Messiah, or maybe you're the Messiah, or maybe I'm the Messiah. And with that attitude, recognizing there's a different way of looking at one another, a different thing that we have to do to bring that forward and really recognize, maybe you're the Messiah. Maybe I am. This is very different, to take that really seriously. To take it really seriously. So what does that mean personally? You know, this is really nice, Reverend John, makes a lot of sense, but what do I need to do personally, spiritually? So I love that story of the Native American Cherokee. The grandfather is talking to his grandson, and you may have heard this before. And the grandfather says, son, there is a battle for your soul going on within you. There are two wolves that are fighting for your soul. And the young boy says, well, who are they? Well, one wolf is filled with fear, doubt, arrogance, worry, hatred, all of those things. And the other is filled with joy, peace, love, harmony, and all of those things. And so the grandson thinks about it and then asks the grandfather the most important question. He says, well, which one will win? And the grandfather says, whichever one you feed. So my question to you, what are you habitually feeding in your life? What are you feeding that is habitual? You know, you come to service on Sunday and that's a good thing, thank God. What else are you doing? So let's say you've heard that story about the wolf before and it resonates with you. And so you live in a way, you want to live in a way, and so you subscribe to the Daily Om, or you read the Science of Mind magazine, and then you have the images of Russian troops coming into the Ukraine, and all of those stories that are just heartbreaking. And you say, well, what do I do now? And just as you're asking yourself that question, you pick up your phone, and there's a news feed that tells you about the latest intrusions of the Russians into the Ukraine. Simultaneously, what pops up is something that you see as an affirmation. And you look at it, and it's from Ernest Holmes. And this is what he says. When you are confused, stop and listen to your inner calm. Turn from the confusion to that deeper something within. Say, and say this after me, I am submerged in peace. I am surrounded by peace. I am immersed in peace. Peace, deep calm, undisturbed. We understand that peace is not the absence of conflict, but an abiding presence in the center of conflict, like the eye of the storm. When I can attain this peace, I am clearer. My thinking is larger. I am able to interact with the chaos around me without fear. Does that make you feel at ease? So which one do you habitually choose? The news feed or the affirmation? Which one are you feeding? How much do you immerse yourself in the daily news and listen? You know, if you hear it once a day is a lot because you hear the same thing the rest of the week. But that affirmation of your power, reminding you, right, of the power that you have. This is an exercise in power. And whether that lasts the minute that I just said it, or whether the minute that you walk out the door, an hour, a week, all depends on the quality of your spiritual practice. In this new order of community consciousness, or a conscious community, this is what we have to step up to. And you might say, well, what does that look like? How do I do that? Well, the first step is, in the midst of uncertainty, finding a way to get your momentum going in a way to make you feel better. That's Abraham Hicks, basic Abraham Hicks. What can you do to feel better in the next moment? Okay? So maybe you've moved beyond that and you're really a fan of affirmations. That's another way of getting yourself moving in the right direction. Or maybe you're familiar with spiritual mind treatment. Maybe just the first three steps of spiritual mind treatment. God is all there is, I am that, and this is what I want. Right? But that gets you moving away from the fear, doubt, worry, anxiety, and into a different place. So if we've done treatment, what's the next step? Treat and move your feet. Now for me, this has always been confusing because I never had an idea of what's next in the plan. You know, what do I do? And for me, what it means is don't stay in the same place. Don't stay in the same place physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, any one of those, but don't just sit there and expect the heavens to open and your solution be presented. So that's the second thing. The first is have a way of moving the momentum in a positive direction. The second is get out of the place that you're stuck in. The third is another form of spiritual practice, and I love this one. I love the way that Eckhart Tolle talks about it in The Power of Now. He was sitting on a bench contemplating suicide. And he recognized that the I that was sitting on the bench was different than the I that was contemplating suicide. And in that recognition, he recognized his own power to make a choice, to feed a different idea. To feed a different idea. So in the Eastern traditions, this is called developing the witness concept, or the observer concept, of watching where your thinking is going so that you can make a choice to think differently. Do you see how this works? Affirmation or treatment, right? Changing, moving your feet, moving your consciousness to a different place, and then watching what happens. And when you watch what happens, you may get an idea to do something differently. Or maybe something happens that upsets you again. And so you go through this spiritual practice cycle of affirming, moving your feet, and observing your thinking. And this is the practice. What this does is build spiritual muscle. It's like when you go to the gym, you want to work out, you have to have a regular practice to strengthen your body, and it all depends on the quality of your workout and the frequency with which you do it. And then you become stronger. And so if we want to be spiritually more robust, then it requires some work. So think about what spiritual practice can you do that's going to develop a habit, right? We want an attitude that can take us through uncertainty. Another definition of attitude is a habit of thought. How do we habitually think about uncertainty? Okay? So what I know for myself is that I have to develop a spiritual practice that is so robust that when I jump into the pool, the deep end of the pool of uncertainty, right? I no longer need the floaty wings of hope. That I can trust and have faith and confidence to know that I'm in the flow of divine right action. I'm in the flow. Nothing can touch me. That's being at ease with uncertainty. As a community, we have to decide how we're going to make that happen. How can we make that happen? And it's that committing to creating that environment of trust, of supporting each other on our journey. That's all that really matters. An environment of safety, trust, compassion, gratitude, and extraordinary respect. And that environment, what happens is, what arises out of that is each person feels more empowered than ever before and equipped to find their fulfillment by being in service to each other. By being in service to each other. It's not for me, but it's for everyone that I meet. Being at ease with uncertainty together is a very different dynamic than trying to deal with it on our own. And what I've seen very often in our teaching is we're expected to do this by ourselves. And the reality is we have each other here, tremendous talent and energy and compassion and extraordinary respect. That to know, we say the universe has our back. Well, this is the universe right here, right now. And so what happens is, we develop this to an extent that each facet on this jewel shines so brightly that it becomes irresistible for anyone, and maybe a new minister, to discover and decide that they want to be here. Because you're brilliant and beautiful, and so am I. And so it is. Thank you.